Somewhere in your body right now, a single red blood cell is sliding through an artery in your upper arm at roughly the speed of a slow walk. It is one of about 25 trillion. It has made this trip before, around 100,000 times in its short life, a relentless loop from heart to tissue and back. And as it slides forward, it drags. The blood it travels in is not frictionless. It is a fluid, and fluids in motion exert a force against any surface they flow along, the same force you feel as a river pushes against your legs when you wade into a current. That dragging force has a name. Engineers call it shear stress. And the surface it is pushing against, right now, in your arm, is a single flat cell, so thin it is almost invisible. A cell that lines the inside of every blood vessel you own. That cell is about to feel the river, and what it does in response is the difference between an artery that stays soft and supple at 80 and one that turns into a rigid pipe at 60. The lining of your blood vessels has a name most people have never heard. The endothelium. It is a single layer of cells, one cell thick, coating the inside of every artery, every vein, every capillary in your body. If you peeled it out and laid it flat, it would cover something close to the area of several tennis courts. It weighs more than your liver. It is, by surface area, one of the largest organs you possess, and almost nobody knows it is an organ at all. For most of medical history, doctors thought it was just wallpaper. A passive, inert lining, a non-stick coating to keep blood from clotting against the vessel wall. They were wrong in a way that took until the late 20th century to fully understand. The endothelium is not wallpaper, it is a sensing, signaling, decision-making tissue, and the single most important thing it senses is motion, the flow of blood across its surface. Here is the mechanism, and it is pure physics before it becomes biology. On the surface of each endothelial cell, facing into the bloodstream, there is a forest, a dense, sugary coating made of long chain molecules called the glycocalyx. Proteins and carbohydrates that stick out into the flow like the soft fronds of seagrass leaning in a current. When blood moves past, these fronds bend. They are mechanical antennae. The bending is not decorative. It physically tugs on the proteins anchored in the cell membrane below, and those proteins are connected to the cell's internal skeleton, a web of tiny structural filaments that runs all the way to the nucleus where the DNA is kept. So a force applied at the outer surface of the cell, the gentle drag of flowing blood, is transmitted as a mechanical pull deep into the machinery of the cell. The cell does not see the blood, it does not hear it. It feels it, the way you feel the wind by the pressure on your skin, and it converts that physical feeling into a chemical message. Scientists call this process mechanotransduction, the translation of a mechanical force into a biological signal. Your arteries are listening to how you move, and the language they listen in is the language of force. Now hold that picture, the bending fronds, the tugged skeleton, the message racing inward. Because here is the part that makes this personal. The strength of that signal depends entirely on how fast and how often the blood flows. When you are sitting still, your heart still beats, blood still moves, the fronds still bend a little, but the flow is slow, lazy, low, and steady. The signal is weak. When you stand up and start walking, your leg muscles begin demanding oxygen, your heart speeds up, blood flow surges, and the shear stress against the endothelium climbs several times higher. The fronds bend hard. The skeleton pulls. The message floods inward at full volume. Movement turns up the dial. Stillness turns it down. And the endothelium, that vast hidden organ, responds to the dial setting not just in the moment, but over years. It remodels itself around the average amount of flow it experiences. An artery that is regularly bathed in vigorous, pulsing flow stays wide, responsive, and elastic. An artery that experiences mostly slow, sluggish flow, day after day, year after year, begins to adapt to that stillness. And the adaptation to stillness is the beginning of stiffness. Your grandmother understood this too, in her own vocabulary. She did not say shear stress. She did not say mechanotransduction or glycocalyx. She said sitting around all day is no good for you. She said you need to stretch your legs. She said a body in motion stays in motion, and she said it while she was already moving, hanging the wash, walking to the market, climbing the stairs because there was no other way up. She lived inside the signal without ever naming it. Her arteries were getting the message all day long, not because she exercised, she would have laughed at the word, but because her life was built out of motion. Standing, carrying, walking, bending. The shear stress never let up. The fronds never stopped bending. The endothelium never had a reason to adapt to stillness, because stillness, in her day, was rare. And that is exactly what changed. Somewhere across the last few generations, motion drained out of ordinary life, the walk to work became a drive, the stairs became an elevator, the standing job became a seated one, the evening on the porch became an evening on the couch. None of it felt like a loss, because each individual step away from motion was small and reasonable and comfortable. But the river slowed, the drag faded, the fronds spent more of each day barely moving, and the great hidden organ lining your arteries began, slowly and silently, to receive a different message. Not the message of a body in motion, the message of a body at rest, and it began, slowly and silently, to build itself accordingly. This is the quiet tragedy of arterial aging, and it is also the opening for the smallest, most ordinary intervention you can imagine. Because the endothelium does not need a marathon. It does not need a gym membership or a heart rate monitor or a punishing routine. It needs flow. It needs the river to run faster than a trickle for some part of the day, every day, on purpose. The tiny daily habit at the center of this entire story is nothing more exotic than putting your large muscles into rhythmic motion long enough to make your blood move with force. And the reason that one small act reaches so far, the reason it can keep an artery soft at 70 that would otherwise have turned to stone, is a chemical the endothelium makes when it feels the flow. A gas. A molecule so simple it is almost nothing. Just one atom of nitrogen bonded to one atom of oxygen. That molecule, and the factory inside your artery wall that manufactures it on demand, is where this story goes next. When the bending fronds of the glycocalyx pull on the cell's skeleton and send that mechanical message racing inward, something specific happens at the end of the journey. The message arrives at a piece of cellular machinery folded into the membrane of the endothelial cell, an enzyme with a long name and an enormous job, endothelial nitric oxide synthase. Scientists shorten it to eNOS, and you can think of it as a tiny factory bolted to the inside wall of your artery, idle until the signal arrives, springing to life the moment the flow picks up. This enzyme has one product. It takes a common amino acid called L-arginine, something already floating in your blood, present in nearly every protein you eat, and it strips off a piece of it, releasing a gas. Nitric oxide. One nitrogen atom, one oxygen atom. The simplest signaling molecule your body uses, and one of the most important things your arteries make. Now, a gas is a strange thing for a cell to manufacture as a message, and the strangeness is exactly what makes it work. Most chemical signals in the body are large, fussy molecules that travel to a specific destination and dock into a specific receptor, like a key into a lock. Nitric oxide does none of that. It is so small and so unattached that the instant it is made, it simply diffuses outward in every direction, slipping straight through cell membranes as if they were not there, because to a molecule that tiny, they barely are. It is made in the endothelial lining, and within a fraction of a second it has drifted into the layer just beneath, the smooth muscle that wraps around the artery like a sleeve. That smooth muscle is what gives an artery its tone. When it contracts, the vessel narrows. When it relaxes, the vessel widens. And nitric oxide is the command to relax. It reaches the muscle cell, triggers an enzyme inside it that produces a second messenger, and the muscle fibers let go. The artery opens, blood flows more freely, pressure eases. Sit with the elegance of that loop for a moment, because it is a piece of engineering so clean it almost looks designed. The blood flows. The flow bends the fronds. The bending makes the signal. The signal fires the eNOS factory. The factory releases nitric oxide. The nitric oxide relaxes the muscle relaxes, and the artery widens. And a wider artery carries more blood with less resistance, which is precisely what a moving body needs when its muscles are screaming for oxygen. The system senses its own demand and answers it in real time, in seconds, with a gas it builds on the spot from raw materials in the blood. When you start to walk and your legs need more fuel, Your arteries do not wait for a hormone to circulate or a nerve to fire. The flow itself opens the pipes. The motion creates the conditions for more motion. Your circulation is, in the most literal sense, self-adjusting, and the substance doing the adjusting is a gas that did not even exist a second before it was needed. This was not always known. For most of the 20th century, nobody understood that the body used a gas to talk to itself. The idea seemed absurd. Gases were waste products, things you exhaled, not delicate biological messengers. The discovery came in pieces through the 1980s, and it earned the Nobel Prize in 1998, shared by three researchers: Robert Furchgott, Louis Ignarro, and Ferid Murad. Furchgott found the first clue almost by accident. He was studying how blood vessels relax, and he kept getting inconsistent results until he realized the difference lay in whether the inner lining, the endothelium, was intact or had been accidentally scraped away during preparation. When the lining was present, certain chemicals relaxed the vessel. When it was gone, the very same chemicals did nothing, or even did the opposite. The lining, the wallpaper everyone had ignored, was producing something. Furchgott did not know what it was, so he gave it a placeholder name: endothelium-derived relaxing factor. A factor that came from the endothelium and made vessels relax. Identity unknown. It took years of work by Ignarro and others to chase down what that mysterious factor actually was, and the answer, when it came, stunned the field. The relaxing factor was nitric oxide, a gas. The same molecule found in smog and engine exhaust was being manufactured deliberately by the lining of your own arteries to keep them soft. Murad, meanwhile, had been working from the other end, studying how a class of heart medicines worked, the nitrates that doctors had given chest pain patients for over a century. Nitroglycerin, the same explosive compound, given in tiny doses, relieved the crushing pain of angina, and nobody knew why. Murad showed that nitroglycerin worked by releasing nitric oxide in the body. For 100 years, physicians had been treating failing hearts with a drug that mimicked the gas the arteries were supposed to make for themselves. The medicine was a crutch, standing in for a natural signal that aging, stiff, damaged vessels could no longer produce in sufficient quantity. The discovery connected three separate mysteries: the scraped lining, the unknown factor, and the ancient heart drug into one clean picture. The endothelium makes nitric oxide. Nitric oxide keeps arteries open. And anything that helps the endothelium make more of it is, in effect, a homemade dose of the same medicine cardiologists have prescribed for generations. Here is where it loops back to motion, and to the dial we set in the last chapter. The enos factory is not running flat out all the time. It is regulated, and one of the strongest things that regulates it is shear stress, the very drag of flowing blood we have been tracking from the start. Higher flow means more bending, more signal, more enos activity, more nitric oxide. And this is not only a moment-to-moment effect. When a vessel experiences strong, regular flow day after day, the endothelial cells actually build more enos machinery. They increase the amount of the enzyme they keep on hand, the way a factory facing steady orders adds more production lines. A body that moves regularly does not just get a temporary nitric oxide boost during the walk. It upgrades the factory itself, so that even at rest, the baseline capacity to produce this artery-relaxing gas is higher. This is one of the deep reasons that a regular daily habit matters more than an occasional heroic effort. You are not just using the machine. You are maintaining and expanding it. Every single day, you put your blood into motion. And the reverse is just as true, which is the part that should make anyone sit up. When flow stays low, when the body spends its days at rest, the enos factory winds down. The cells keep less enzyme on hand. Worse, a sedentary, inflamed, sugar-stressed environment can cause something called enos uncoupling, where the factory malfunctions and, instead of producing the protective gas, begins producing damaging molecules called free radicals, the very things that injure the vessel further. The same enzyme that protects the artery can, under bad conditions, turn against it. So the choice is not simply between more nitric oxide and less. At the extremes, it is between an endothelium that heals itself and one that is actively wounding itself, and the dial that tilts the balance is, to a remarkable degree, how much you move. So now we have two of the three pieces of this whole story in place. We have the sensing organ, the endothelium, with its bending fronds, listening to the flow of your blood. And we have the response, the enos factory and its gas, nitric oxide, opening the arteries and signaling the muscle to relax. A young, active body runs this loop thousands of times a day, and the arteries stay soft, responsive, and wide. But there is a third piece, and it is the one that creeps in slowly, almost invisibly, across the decades after 60, because even with the signal intact and the factory running, the physical material of the artery itself, the actual fabric the vessel is built from, begins to change. The wall gets thicker. The springy, elastic fibers fray. A slow chemistry of sugar and protein begins to glue the structure into something more rigid. And when the pipe itself turns stiff, even a perfect flood of nitric oxide can only do so much. That slow stiffening of the material, what causes it, what it does to the rest of you, and why it is not nearly as inevitable as it looks, is where we turn next. To understand what actually stiffens in an aging artery, you have to look at what an artery is made of, and it is not made of one thing. The wall of a healthy artery is a layered composite, an engineered material, and two proteins do most of the structural work. The first is elastin. Elastin is exactly what it sounds like. A protein that stretches and springs back, arranged in your arteries as sheets and fibers that let the vessel expand with each heartbeat and recoil afterward. The second is collagen, a far stiffer, rope-like protein that provides strength and keeps the vessel from overstretching and tearing. Think of elastin as the rubber band and collagen as the seatbelt. The rubber band gives the artery its springiness, its willingness to swell and rebound. The seatbelt sets the limit, catching the load before anything ruptures. A young artery is rich in elastin, low in stiff collagen, and the balance between them gives the vessel a quality engineers would call compliance. It yields easily to a small push and returns to shape. That compliance is the physical definition of a flexible artery, and it is the thing you are trying to keep. Now watch what each heartbeat asks of that material. When your heart contracts, it does not push blood into your arteries as a smooth, continuous stream. It ejects it in a pulse, a sudden surge of pressure, perhaps 60, 70, 80 times a minute, every minute, for your entire life. Run the arithmetic, and it is staggering. Somewhere past 2.5 billion beats across an average lifespan, and the largest artery of all, the aorta, the great pipe leaving the heart, takes the full force of every single one. In a young body, the aorta handles this beautifully. With each pulse it expands, soaking up the surge like a balloon swelling, storing the energy of that pressure spike in the stretch of its elastin. Then, between beats, it recoils, squeezing that stored energy back into the blood and pushing it smoothly onward. Cardiologists call this the Windkessel effect, after the old German fire engines that used an air chamber to turn the choppy pumping of a hand pump into a steady, continuous stream of water. Your aorta is a Windkessel. It converts the violent stutter of the heartbeat into the gentle, even flow that your delicate organs need. And it does this work beat after beat, year after year, by being elastic. Elastin, though, has a peculiar and humbling property. Your body lays down most of its elastin early in life, in the womb and in childhood, and after that, it makes very little new elastin ever again. The elastin in your aorta right now is, for the most part, the same elastin you had as a young adult. It is not continuously replaced the way many tissues are. It is laid down, and then it must last. And here is the problem with something that must endure 2.5 billion stretch cycles without renewal. It fatigues. The same way a rubber band left stretched and released thousands of times eventually goes slack and brittle, the elastin fibers in your arteries slowly fracture and fray across the decades. The microscopic sheets develop breaks. The springy network loses its integrity. And as the elastin frays, the load it used to carry shifts onto the collagen, the stiff seatbelt protein, which the body does keep making throughout life, often laying down more of it as it ages. So the balance tilts. Less working elastin, more rigid collagen. The rubber band wears out and the seatbelt takes over, and a seatbelt does not spring. It holds. The artery, beat by beat and year by year, trades its compliance for rigidity. This is arterial stiffening at the level of the material itself, and it is one of the most reliable changes in all of human aging. There is a second process, slower and quieter, that makes it worse, and it comes from an unexpected place: sugar. Glucose circulating in your blood is mostly fuel, but a small fraction of it does something chemically mischievous. It reacts with the long-lived proteins of your body, latching onto them, and over time, forming permanent bridges between adjacent protein strands. Chemists call these advanced glycation end products, and the acronym is darkly fitting: AGEs. These sugar-protein crosslinks act like tiny welds, fusing the collagen and elastin fibers of your artery wall to one another so they can no longer slide and flex independently. Imagine a rope that bends freely, then imagine spot welding it every inch along its length. It becomes a rod. That is what crosslinking does to the fabric of your arteries. And because elastin lasts a lifetime without replacement, it accumulates these welds for a lifetime, growing progressively stiffer. This is also one of the clearest reasons that chronically high blood sugar ages the arteries so brutally. More glucose in the blood means more cross-linking, faster welding, quicker stiffening. The diabetic artery and the simply old artery are traveling the same road, and sugar presses the accelerator. So now picture the stiffened pipe and ask what it does to the rest of the body, because this is where arterial stiffness stops being an abstraction and starts doing real damage. Remember the windkessel, the elastic aorta that absorbed each pressure surge and smoothed it out. When the aorta stiffens, it can no longer expand to soak up the pulse. The full force of each heartbeat now slams directly into the arterial system with nothing to cushion it. The top number of your blood pressure, the systolic pressure, climbs because the surge is no longer being absorbed. This is precisely why systolic blood pressure tends to rise steadily with age, while the bottom number often falls, widening the gap between them, a pattern doctors see so consistently they treat it as a signature of stiff arteries. A higher systolic pressure means the heart must push against greater resistance with every beat, and like any muscle forced to work harder, the heart wall thickens and grows. A change that sounds like strength, but is actually a step toward failure. The damage does not stop at the heart. A stiff aorta does something subtle and vicious to the timing of the pressure wave it carries. In a young, compliant artery, the pulse travels relatively slowly, and the reflected waves that bounce back from the body's periphery return gently, in a rhythm that helps fill the heart's own arteries during the rest phase between beats. In a stiff artery, the pulse races, the reflections come back early and hard, and that violent, undamped pressure wave drives deep into the body's most delicate, high-flow organs. Two organs suffer most, because both are soft, both receive enormous blood flow, and both have tiny, fragile vessels. The brain and the kidneys, the pounding pressure wave, no longer cushioned, hammers the microscopic vessels of the brain, and over years this is now understood to contribute to the small vessel damage underlying certain kinds of cognitive decline. The same hammering injures the fine filtering vessels of the kidneys. Arterial stiffness, measured directly, turns out to be one of the strongest predictors of future heart attack, stroke, and kidney decline that medicine has, a number that forecasts trouble years before symptoms arrive. The flexibility of your arteries is not a cosmetic detail of aging. It is, to a remarkable degree, the condition of the organs your arteries feed. But here is the turn, and it is the most hopeful sentence in this entire story. Arterial stiffness is not a fixed, one-way trip. For decades, it was assumed that once an artery hardened, that was simply that, the inevitable rust of age. The measurements tell a different story. Studies that track arterial stiffness in active people against sedentary people find a striking gap, and studies that take previously sedentary middle-aged and older adults and put them into regular movement find that arterial stiffness can actually decrease, that the pipe can soften again, at least in part. The fraying elastin may not regrow, but the artery's overall behavior depends on far more than worn elastin alone. It depends on the tone of that smooth muscle sleeve, on the health of the endothelium, on the steady supply of nitric oxide we tracked in the last chapter, and all of those respond vigorously to flow. The stiffening of age sets a slope, but the daily habit of moving your blood bends that slope measurably at almost any age you choose to begin. Exactly how much it bends it, what the researchers actually measured, and how small a daily dose it really takes, So, what do the numbers actually say, and how do you measure something as hidden as the stiffness of a pipe buried deep in a living body? The cleverest method is also the simplest in principle, and it goes back to the pressure wave we just watched racing through the aorta. When your heart beats, the pulse travels down your arteries at a measurable speed, and that speed depends directly on how stiff the walls are. A flexible tube slows the wave. A rigid tube speeds it up, the same way a sound wave travels faster through steel than through rubber. Researchers place one sensor at the neck over the carotid artery and another at the groin over the femoral artery, and they time how long the pulse takes to travel between them. Divide the distance by the time and you get a velocity. They call it pulse wave velocity, and it has become the gold standard measurement of arterial stiffness. A low number means a soft, compliant aorta. A high number means a stiff one. And in study after study, that single number predicts cardiovascular trouble with unsettling accuracy, often better than blood pressure itself. It is, in effect, a speedometer for your aging, reading out the condition of the most important pipe in your body. When researchers point this tool at large groups of people, the pattern is consistent and clear. Those who are habitually physically active have lower pulse wave velocity, softer arteries, than those who are sedentary, and the gap holds even after accounting for age, weight, and blood pressure. The active arteries are simply more flexible. But a snapshot comparison like that always carries a doubt, the possibility that people with naturally healthier arteries are simply more inclined to move, rather than the movement causing the health. To untangle that, you need a different kind of study. The kind that takes sedentary people and changes their behavior on purpose, then measures what happens to the artery afterward. Those studies have been done, and they are the heart of the evidence. When previously inactive middle-aged and older adults begin a program of regular aerobic movement, walking being the most studied, their arterial stiffness measurably decreases over a matter of months. The pipe softens, the pulse wave slows, the effect is real, it is repeatable, and it shows up in people well past 60, which is precisely the population that was once assumed to be past helping. The work of one research group is worth singling out because they ask the question that matters most to anyone reading this. How early do you have to start, and how much is enough? Hirofumi Tanaka and Douglas Seals, working in exercise physiology over many years, helped establish much of what is now understood about how habitual aerobic activity preserves and restores the flexibility of arteries across the lifespan. Their work, and the broader body of research around it, points to a consistent picture. Endurance-type movement, the rhythmic kind that uses your large muscles and raises your heart rate for a sustained stretch, is the form that most reliably keeps the central arteries supple. People who have moved this way for much of their lives often show arteries decades younger than their birthdays. And people who start later, even well into older age, still gain. The slope bends. Not always all the way back to youth, but meaningfully, measurably, in the direction that protects the heart and brain and kidneys downstream. Now here is the question everyone wants answered, and this is where honesty matters more than enthusiasm. How much, exactly? What is the dose? The pull is always toward more, toward the idea that if a little movement helps, then punishing amounts must help proportionally more. The data does not support that, and the shape of the benefit curve is the single most encouraging fact in this whole story. The largest gains in cardiovascular health do not come at the far end of the curve, among the elite and the extreme. They come at the very beginning, in the climb from doing almost nothing to doing something regular and moderate. The jump from a sedentary life to a modestly active one delivers a benefit out of all proportion to the effort it costs. The curve then flattens. Going from moderate activity to heroic activity adds far less than going from nothing to moderate did. In plain terms, the person who has the most to gain in the entire population is the person currently doing the least, and the amount of movement required to capture the bulk of that gain is far smaller than most people fear. This is not a counsel of mediocrity. It is the actual shape of the evidence, and it is good news for exactly the people who feel least able to begin. The public health guidance that has settled out of decades of this research lands on a number that is worth stating plainly. Something in the neighborhood of 150 minutes a week of moderate movement. Split that across the week, and it is around 20 to 30 minutes a day. Moderate, in this context, has a precise and reassuring meaning. It does not mean exhaustion. It means the intensity at which you can still talk but would struggle to sing, the pace of a brisk walk where your breathing has deepened and your heart has clearly picked up, but you are not gasping. That is the zone where the blood moves with enough force to bend the fronds, fire the enos factory, and bathe the endothelium in the flow it has been waiting for. You do not need to run. You do not need a gym. You do not need to be out of breath or in pain. You need your large muscles working rhythmically, your heart rate up, your blood moving with vigor for a sustained stretch of time on most days. That is the entire prescription, and it has been hiding in plain sight inside the dullest health advice you have ever been given. There is a detail in the timing that deserves emphasis, because it changes how you should think about the whole thing. The nitric oxide response we tracked in Chapter 2 is not a permanent deposit. It is a daily event. A single session of movement raises endothelial function and improves flow for a period of hours, and then it fades. The benefit of one walk is real, but temporary. This is why the word that matters most in this entire script is not intensity. It is consistency, daily. A vigorous workout on Saturday followed by 6 still days does far less for your arteries than a brisk 20-minute walk taken every single day, because the endothelium lives in the present. It responds to the flow it received today, and the day before, and the day before that. The factory expands only if the orders keep coming. This is genuinely liberating, because it means the goal was never to find an hour you do not have for a punishing session you will dread. The goal is to find 20 manageable minutes you will actually repeat. The repetition is the active ingredient. The habit is the medicine. And one more piece of honesty, because this story would be incomplete without it. Movement is powerful, but it is not the only lever, and it cannot fully outrun the others. The sugar cross-linking we discussed in the last chapter still proceeds if blood sugar runs high, so what you eat still matters. Smoking poisons the endothelium directly, slashing nitric oxide production no matter how much you walk. Sleep, blood pressure, and chronic stress all press on the same vessel wall. The daily habit at the center of this story is the most underused and the most accessible of the levers, the one with the steepest payoff for the least cost, but it works alongside the others, not in place of them. Anyone who promises that a single habit erases all the rest is selling something. What the evidence actually offers is quieter and more durable. A small, repeatable, daily act that bends the slope of arterial aging in your favor, that compounds over years, and that protects, through the single soft pipe at the center of you, every organ that pipe feeds. What that protection looks like across the whole body, and the grandmother who prescribed it long before any of this could be measured. Step back now and follow the consequence outward, from one flexible vessel to the whole body that depends on it, because this is where the smallness of the habit collides with the size of what it protects. A single artery does not work alone. It is one segment of a continuous network, and the condition of that network determines what reaches every organ you have. When the great central arteries stay soft, the pulse leaving your heart is cushioned and smoothed, exactly as it was designed to be, and the blood arrives at your tissues as a gentle, even flow. Your brain receives that smooth flow through its millions of tiny vessels, and the delicate filtering structures of your kidneys receive it through theirs, and neither is hammered by the undamped pressure spike that a stiff aorta delivers. Your heart, pushing against compliant arteries instead of rigid ones, does less work with every beat, and over 2.5 billion beats. Less work means a wall that stays healthy instead of thickening toward failure. The flexible artery is not a local convenience. It is an upstream condition that every downstream organ quietly lives or dies by. Keep the pipe soft, and you have protected, in one stroke, the organs you cannot see and would never think to defend directly. This is why the nitric oxide story reaches so much further than blood pressure. The same gas that relaxes the artery wall also keeps the inner lining smooth and non-stick, discouraging the platelets and inflammatory cells that begin the slow construction of plaque. A healthy, flow-fed endothelium resists the very process that clogs arteries. A starved, sedentary one invites it. So, the daily act of moving your blood is not only keeping the pipe flexible, it is keeping the pipe clean, working against the buildup that leads to heart attack and stroke at the same time. It works against the stiffness that leads to high pressure and organ strain. One habit, one molecule, several diseases held at bay at once, all of it flowing from the simple fact that a moving body bathes its endothelium in the force that endothelium evolved to feel. The benefit was never narrow. It was always systemic, because the circulation is the one system that touches everything else. Notice, too, how every chapter of this story has quietly pointed back to the same act. The bending fronds of the glycocalyx needed flow. The Enos factory needed shear stress to fire and steady orders to expand. The frayed elastin and welded collagen of the aging wall could be partly offset by the tone of muscle and the supply of nitric oxide, both of which answer to movement. The measurements showed the pipe softening in people who started walking, even late. 4 different layers of the same machinery, the mechanical sensor, the chemical factory, the structural fabric, the whole body downstream, and a single intervention reaches all of them. Not 4 habits for 4 mechanisms. 1 habit, because the mechanisms are not really separate. They are one continuous system that runs on the flow of blood, and the flow of blood runs on the motion of the body. This is the deep reason the prescription is so absurdly simple relative to what it accomplishes. You are not treating 4 things. You are restoring one condition, the condition of a body in regular motion, and the body's own machinery does the rest. So, let us state the habit plainly, with no mystery left in it, because it has earned the right to be said simply. Most days of the week, put your large muscles into rhythmic motion and keep them there for 20 to 30 minutes. At a pace brisk enough that your breathing deepens and your heart picks up, but you could still hold a conversation. A brisk walk satisfies this completely. So does cycling, swimming, dancing, climbing stairs, working in a garden with real exertion, anything that uses the big muscles of the legs and hips and raises the flow of blood with force, sustained, repeated, daily. That is the entire thing. There is no equipment that matters more than your own legs, no technology that improves on the basic act, no supplement that substitutes for the flow itself. The arginine your Enos factory needs is already in your food. The nitric oxide is already within your power to make. The only missing ingredient, for most people most days, is the motion that turns the dial up. 20 minutes, most days, brisk enough to feel it. That is a habit small enough to keep for the rest of your life. And that is precisely the point, because it is the keeping, not the intensity, that does the work. And here's the part worth holding on to if you are past 60 and tempted to think the moment has passed. It has not. The evidence is unusually generous on this point. Arteries respond to flow at every age that has been studied. The person who begins a daily walk at 65 is not too late, and the person who begins at 75 is not too late either, because the endothelium does not check your birthday before it responds to the river. It responds to today's flow and tomorrow's and the day after that. The slope of stiffening that age draws can be bent at the point you are standing on right now, whatever point that is. You cannot regrow the elastin you laid down as a child, but you can change almost everything that elastin shares the wall with, and the body will meet you partway the moment you give it the signal. The most encouraging finding in all of this research is not that movement prevents arterial aging in the young. It is that movement still helps the old, that the door is not closed, that beginning late still beats not beginning. The river can run faster starting tomorrow, and the lining of your arteries will know. Your grandmother, of course, knew none of the mechanism and all of the truth. She never heard the word endothelium. She could not have told you that a gas relaxes your arteries, or that flowing blood bends a forest of sugary fronds on a cell thinner than paper. She did not need to. She told you to get up off that chair. She told you that sitting all day was no good for a body. She told you to walk it off, to stretch your legs, to make yourself useful. And she said it while she was moving, because her whole life was built out of the motion this entire story is about. She lived inside the prescription. She just called it living. And every piece of physiology that 30 years of careful science has measured and published and confirmed turns out to be a footnote to what she already practiced without a single instrument to prove it. A body in motion keeps its arteries soft. A body at rest lets them harden. She watched the people who kept moving stay sharp and strong and upright into old age, and she watched the people who settled into the chair fade faster, And she drew the obvious conclusion decades before anyone could explain why she was right. So tomorrow morning, before the day fills up with reasons not to, get up and move. 20 minutes, brisk enough to feel your heart respond. Put your blood into motion with force and let it run across the hidden lining of your arteries the way it was always meant to. Somewhere inside you, a single endothelial cell will feel the river quicken. A forest of fronds will bend. A factory will fire. A gas that did not exist a moment before will drift into the muscle of your artery wall and tell it to relax, and the pipe will open, and the pressure will ease, and every organ downstream will receive the smooth, gentle flow it has been quietly waiting for. You will not feel any of it happening. You almost never do. But it will happen today and tomorrow and every day you choose to move, and across the years it will add up to the difference between an artery that turns to stone and one that stays supple long past the age when everyone assumed the matter was settled. The body has been waiting for the motion it was built to receive. Give it the 20 minutes. The body, as it always has, will do the rest.